Tonight on Steelers Talk, we've got the latest when it comes to the Steelers head coaching search. First up, Sean McDermott has been fired as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. Should the Steelers consider bringing him in as their next head coach? Then there's an NFL insider that says that the Steelers, quote-unquote, really like Chris Shula. Let you guys know my thoughts on Shula later in today's show. And then I'll make sure you guys stick around because there's a surprising candidate that just got a second interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to let you know who that is and why I don't think it's as bad of an option as a lot of Steelers fans think. But before we get into the Steelers coaching search news and rumors and all this different stuff today, make sure you guys click that subscribe button because we got daily updates on the Steelers head coaching search here on the channel. We've got in-person interviews now. The first step of the process is now officially over, according to the team. Now you get to the in-person interviews, and it's just heating up, guys. So make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And, of course, when the Steelers make their decision as to who the next head coach is going to be here in Pittsburgh, we'll be going live on this channel when that news strikes, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 2 or 3 weeks from now. We will make sure to be going live whenever the next head coach is named here in the Steel City. All right, so we'll start here with some hiring news, actually, where the Miami Dolphins are hiring Packers defensive coordinator and Steelers head coaching candidate Jeff Hafley to be their next head coach, joining John Eric Sullivan, their new GM, there in Miami. Now, something to keep in mind here is that this might make it a little bit less likely if you want Malik Willis here in Pittsburgh for him to actually come here, because now you get 2 Green Bay guys that are looking for a quarterback in Miami. I would say Malik Willis ending up with the Dolphins is a pretty decent chance at this point in time. And of course, that means Hafley will be taken off of the board for the Pittsburgh Steelers head coaching job. But then there's actually another firing in the league, a day where there's a head coach being hired, there's a guy getting fired, as the Buffalo Bills have fired their head coach Sean McDermott after their divisional round loss to the Denver Broncos this weekend. And it's another season with Josh Allen playing at arguably an MVP caliber level there for Buffalo, where the team doesn't even make it to the Super Bowl. And it definitely felt like this year McDermott was coaching for his job, and that ends up being the case. He is now a free agent, free to sign with any team that wants him to be their next head coach. And the question is, should the Steelers consider bringing him in? All right, should they consider bringing him in for an in-person interview here coming up? I'm sure McDermott would love a chance to would love an interview here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do believe that the Steelers have a really good job with the amount of draft picks that they have and the foundation that they have in place. McDermott could select his hopefully next Josh Allen here in Pittsburgh if he got the job. And, there is things to like about McDermott's profile. He currently, he leaves the Buffalo Bills with the second highest win percentage among NFL head coaches, with over a 66% win percentage. He wins 2/3 of his games. Okay, so that is a very impressive figure. Obviously, he made the playoffs pretty much every single year there at the Buffalo Bills, especially when Josh Allen has been at the height of his powers for about the last half decade. However, with that said, Sean McDermott failed to even make a single Super Bowl appearance with Josh Allen, one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the National Football League over the last several seasons, coming up short against Patrick Mahomes and other teams. And he just lost with Josh Allen versus Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. I know they were on the road, and Denver's a tough place to play, but I think a lot of people in Buffalo expected to win that football game and expected to make a run for a Super Bowl this year with Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow, the other elite quarterbacks in the AFC, out of the picture this year. So, if McDermott can't win a Super Bowl with Josh Allen and some of the defenses that he had there in Buffalo over the years, how can you really expect him to be the guy that bring Super Bowls to the Pittsburgh Steelers if we hired him here? Unless you're bringing in a Josh Allen level talent, and even then he couldn't get it done with Josh Allen. So I think that there is certainly some doubt that McDermott is a good enough head coach to get a team with an elite quarterback like Josh Allen over the hump. And of course, that's if the Steelers can even get an elite quarterback if McDermott gets hired. So to be clear, I think there would be worse head coaching options. McDermott is a very stable NFL head coach that knows how to run an organization, a lot of experience there, and a lot of winning there in Buffalo under the McDermott tenure. So I certainly think there's worse hires that the Steelers could make here, but I also think that there are certainly some younger, better options with higher upside than Sean McDermott that are currently out there on the market. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. What grade would you give a Sean McDermott hire here in Pittsburgh? Give me an A, B, C, D, or F for today's pinned question. Just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our friends at Prize Picks. And while I tell you about today's sponsor, give me an A, B, C, D, or F down there in the comments. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And guys, the big game is almost here in Santa Clara, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close out the season outright with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature from Prize Picks now that the Prize Picks now has is early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. So for this weekend's conference championship matchups here in professional football, I'm going to take the more on passing yards for Drake May, the less on Jarrett Stidham passing yards. Sorry, Jarrett. I'm going to take the more on Matthew Stafford passing yards and the more on Sam Darnold passing yards. I'm expecting a shootout in Seattle this weekend. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, so now let's take a look here at Chris Shula, who is currently the betting favorite to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated and NFL Insider says that he has information that the Steelers, quote-unquote, really like Rams defensive coordinator Chris Shula to be their next head coach. He didn't say that he is locked in or anything like that. He says that the Steelers do have an open mind, but that right now the Steelers, quote-unquote, really like the Rams defensive coordinator. This is what Albert Breer had to say exactly. He says, I can tell you right now the Steelers really like Chris Shula. I don't think that that's any sort of song and dance. I think that it's a real intention to go through a real process, but it doesn't mean Shula is getting hired because the Steelers are going through the full process. So essentially what Breer is saying is that the Steelers really like Shula as a candidate, and they're probably going to give him that second interview in person whenever they're allowed to do it. And he's going to be right there among the finalists to get the job. But it also means that some other guys, guys like Brian Flores and some of the other people we're going to be talking about towards the end of today's show also have a chance to make their case and convince Omar Khan and Art Rooney II that they should lead this franchise forward into the next era of Steelers football. Now, Shula is a really good head coach candidate, in my opinion, guys. First things first, Shula has helped develop that Rams defense, which is really young. A lot of very recent draft picks. He's turned a lot of, fourth and fifth round picks there in LA into legitimate starting pieces. And, for a defense that is so young and really so inexpensive, it is the least expensive defense in the National Football League. And some of the numbers that the Rams have been able to put together this year, very impressive. Top 10 in points per game, EPA per play, and success rate for a defense with that many young players on it, and the quick development that Chris Shula and his staff have been able to put together with those young players and to get them to play cohesively certainly points to his football acumen, his ability to put together good game plans, and, his track record as a teacher. And speaking of that track record, Shula's been a position coach at all three levels of the Rams defense throughout his time in LA. I mean, he's worked under Wade Phillips, Raheem Morris, and now he's worked obviously under Sean McVay as the defensive coordinator, and he's run the defense as well. So he's coached defensive linemen, he's coached linebackers. By the way, he played linebacker when he was a player back in the day, and he's coached DBs as well. And I think when I've been going back and listening to some of his interviews about how that gives him a leg up, he's like, I know what specific challenges are present with all three levels of the defense, and I know how to fix those problems because I've been in the thick of those things. So that's absolutely something that I think makes Shula super qualified for a head coaching position as a defensive-minded head coach. And then additionally, he's got excellent OC connections. Like, he could hire fellow Steelers head coaching candidate Nate Scheelhaase if he doesn't get a head coaching job elsewhere. I know Scheelhaase has a head coaching second head coaching interview with Cleveland. We'll see if he ends up getting that job. But like Shula being the head coach here with Scheelhaase being the new OC, I mean, in terms of a schematic standpoint right there, it's hard to do a lot better than that. that if you are the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then in terms of being able to run an organization, run an NFL team, I mean, Shula's been partnered with Sean McVay, who's one of his best friends, pretty much since the start of McVay's tenure there in LA. And, Shula's really had to work his way up, and he's earned every single promotion that he has gotten there in LA. And like being in that same building with Sean McVay, I mean, you learn a thing or two about, setting a really good culture and doing all these things that the Rams do so well. And, make an environment that players want to play in. And I think that Shula would certainly have a chance to bring that. Now, the one question that I do have when it comes to Shula is, does he have that, bite to him? Does he have that intense presence that Chuck Noll had, that Bill Cowher had, that Mike Tomlin had, where when he steps into a room, everybody knows he's in that room? And, I'm not exactly sure he has that. Okay. Now, maybe he does. Like, I'm not in the Rams building. All right. I'll admit that. But like just listening to him on some of these interviews and these press conferences, he seems like, he's not necessarily soft. That's not what I'm trying to say. But maybe he doesn't have the presence of like a Mike Tomlin or a Bill Cowher or something like that. I think he's extremely qualified for the position. Don't get me wrong. And, with all that said, I do trust Pittsburgh to hire the right person. And if they feel like he's got the leadership chops to stand in front of the Steelers roster every single day and lead these troops into battle, I'm going to trust their judgment on that because they're interviewing him and I'm not. And I would be extremely happy if Shula ends up being the hire. I do have that question mark as to, does he have that presence and that charisma to be able to replace a guy like Mike Tomlin in his old meeting room? But if the Steelers feel like, the interviews go well and he has those leadership chops, I'm absolutely down to go with Chris Shula as the next head coach of the Black and Gold. And if you guys would be happy with Chris Shula as our next head coach here in Pittsburgh, click that thumbs up icon if you haven't already. I think he'd be a pretty darn good hire, guys. If you're with me on that, click that thumbs up icon if you haven't already. Now let's get into Anthony Weaver, okay, the former Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator who is now getting a second in-person interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, what that means, okay, it doesn't mean his second in-person interview. That means this is his second interview, and this is the second step, which is an in-person interview. He had a virtual interview last week, and apparently he made enough of an impression with Art Rooney and with Omar Khan to get a second look here. And, I think Anthony Weaver does absolutely have that presence that we're talking about. I think he absolutely embodies AFC North football with his toughness. He's a former player in this division. He knows what the Steelers-Ravens rivalry is all about. And, some people think that, bringing in Weaver is to fulfill the Rooney Rule requirements and stuff like that. But honestly, I don't think that's the case necessarily, okay? I think because the Steelers have been looking at other minority candidates, like they could have, fulfilled their Rooney Rule, obligations with Nate Scheelhaase and Brian Flores, who they've, Flores is already, we know, is getting an in-person interview tomorrow, and Scheelhaase we know that they feel pretty good about as well. So like they didn't need to bring back Anthony Weaver for a second interview if they weren't like genuinely interested in him as a potential candidate. And I do think that Weaver is a better candidate than a lot of Steelers fans want to give him credit for. I think that this is an example of somebody that didn't necessarily have the horses in Miami to really show off what he could do as a defensive coordinator and play caller, but he runs like the same exact defense that Mike McDaniel runs in Seattle, guys. He just didn't have the defensive line that Seattle has. They didn't have a Nick Emmanwori in that Miami defense, right? They had a terrible cornerback room this year. They had a number of defensive linemen that just couldn't anchor in the run game, which is really, really important for this 4-2 base big nickel defense. And, I think that, that big nickel defense would be a good fit here in Pittsburgh. You've got a big nickel in Jalen Ramsey. I think that you can mold this defense with Derek Harmon and, and then Keanu Benson, and then hopefully you can bring in somebody else to play that other defensive tackle spot. You got some good run defenders at the edge rusher positions. I think that this defense and this scheme is a good fit for Pittsburgh. And, I think that, he's got some decent connections to some OC candidates as well. I mean, Mike McDaniel obviously would be, the home run OC hire. It sounds like he might take a different job, however. But then Frank Smith, who has been, in head coaching talks over the last several years as well. He was the OC under McDaniel there in Miami. He would be a potential candidate. Also, Darrell Bevell, who is the quarterback's coach in Miami. He has extensive NFL play calling experience, has developed quarterbacks in this league like Russell Wilson and Trevor Lawrence and more. And honestly, Greg Roman wouldn't be my favorite, but he does have that connection to Weaver because Greg was in Baltimore when Weaver was there for a short period of time. So now that Roman's been fired, that would be a possibility. But honestly, any of those Dolphins options I would prefer over Greg Roman. And guys, with Weaver, there's absolutely no questioning his presence. When he walks into a room, you know he is there. If you listen to any of his press conference clips, he's talking about violence and putting your helmet under somebody's chin strap and all this different stuff that like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed used to say in Baltimore. He's a former player with the Ravens, and he's got that presence about him. There's no question about that. There's a question with that, in my opinion, with Chris Shula. There's no question about that with Anthony Weaver. And Art Rooney II has said that presence, that leadership ability is the number one thing that he looks for in his head coaches here in Pittsburgh. And honestly, man, it wouldn't shock me if Weaver blows Omar Khan and Art Rooney away with his presence. He's got, something there, man, where it's just like you want to follow that guy into battle. And that combined with the McDonald big nickel defense, the connections to offensive coordinator candidates from that Miami Dolphins offense that had a lot of success in Miami. This is a dark horse candidate that, people should not be underestimating, in my opinion. Now, it's also worth mentioning that Weaver is getting a second interview with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I actually think Weaver probably has a better chance of being hired by Baltimore than Pittsburgh. It kind of seems like the Steelers are leaning more towards Shula or Brian Flores at this point. And Weaver, like I was talking about, runs the same defense that had so much success here in 2023 under Mike McDaniel. All right, like he's got a relationship with some of those players in the building that already know what he's about. He's got that presence to him. He's got that quote-unquote play like a Raven style mantra that he could bring to that building. I still think Jesse Minter probably has the inline road to get that Baltimore job, but if they decide to go somewhere else, I think Weaver probably is their second choice. And, to be clear, Weaver is not my number one choice here in Pittsburgh. I've talked very glowingly about Chris Shula, and my actual number one choice, as you guys know if you've been watching the channel, is Brian Flores, and he has his second interview, his in-person interview in Pittsburgh tomorrow. Okay, so keep your eye on that. I'm sure we'll get some reporting on that tomorrow. We'll make sure to get that to you guys right here on Steelers Talk. And if you guys want a little bit more of an in-depth look at Brian Flores' defense and why it's a completely unique defense to anything else any of these candidates are bringing to the table, you guys can check out my in-depth scheme breakdown on the Brian Flores defense that we put up on the channel this weekend. I'll put the chip to that one in the top right if you want to check it out. But that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers News and Rumors here on Steelers Talk, guys. I appreciate your support. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button to never miss any of our free videos on this channel that we put up on the show every single day. Really do appreciate your guys' support. Until next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.